everyone. I'm Reverend Karla, and welcome to Spirituality Matters, a podcast that focuses on the intersectionality of spirituality and humanity. And now I invite you to settle into that sacred space between here where I am and there where you are. And let us be reminded that the holy transcends our physical bodies, and our time together can be just as sacred and meaningful as if we were sitting beside one another. And I am so honored with our first guest for 2023. I'd like to introduce you to Alejandro Rodriguez, who is the Executive Director of Spirituality Network, a role he's held since October of 2021. He recently retired as an HR executive from a Fortune 100 company, where he led change management efforts to help the organization embrace its evolving culture, among other HR initiatives. He has been a spiritual director since 2019 and is active in social justice efforts in his community. Alejandro, it is such an honor to have you here today.
Thank you, Karla. It is a real treat for me to join you. Thank you for asking me to participate in this.
Well, I have so many questions for you about your background, but also about the Spirituality Network. You think that you think you know so many people, and then all of a sudden you find out about this amazing organization in the state right next to us. I'm in Indiana, you're in Ohio. So I'd love to start there. If you want to tell a little bit about what Spirituality Network is and the services you're providing, and then also how you came to be the director.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'm honestly not surprised that you hadn't heard about us. My own pastor says that the Spirituality Network is the best kept secret in Columbus, and I'm working really hard to change that. As an organization, we've been around for a little bit more than 36 years. And it was founded by a group of Dominican sisters. It has its roots in Catholicism, but over those 36 years, we have evolved to be one that embraces people of all faith backgrounds or no faith background, which I just love. As you know, you indicated in my introduction, I'm a social justice warrior. I love diversity and everything about it. So I'm thrilled that our organization reaches out to people from all faith backgrounds and people that, you know, are just seeking, which is a real delight. The organization, one of the main things that we do is training people to be spiritual directors or spiritual companions. I had the real blessing of being trained through our Well Streams program before I became executive director. And it was a life-changing experience for me. I had been on the board prior to that. I became aware of the Spirituality Network when I switched churches back in the early 2000s. And I had moved from a more conservative evangelical church to a more progressive, social justice-driven church. And I saw a sign for a men's retreat one weekend when I was there for worship. And I thought, man, it's been a minute since I've been on a retreat. Let me check this out. And it was just like a Saturday morning and afternoon thing. And I felt like I was with kindred spirits the entire day. And I struck up a conversation with one of the organizers of the retreat. And before I had left for the weekend, I had signed up to serve on the board.
Oh.
So I'm a person that tends to get involved in things, not typically that quickly, but it was just a real blessing to be able to serve on the board for 7 years, 2 years as board chairperson. But you know, it was funny. Even with that time on the board, I wasn't really sure what spiritual direction was. And it was such a pivotal part of it. I was definitely aware of our Well Streams program and the emphasis around it. And while I was on the board, I was invited many times to participate in the Well Streams program. but it never felt like it was the right time for me until after I actually got my master's degree. And I thought, all right, I need something else as a space to grow. And Wellstreams provided that opportunity. So, a lot of what we do in addition to training people as spiritual directors is things around continuing education and supervision of spiritual directors. So we host a number of workshops and programs that invite people who are spiritual directors or who are just interested in growing their faith in perhaps an untraditional way to come and experience what I describe as wholeness and freedom. That's kind of what we seek to help people do and to awaken their lives so that they can transform the world. So we do a couple of other things that of note. We have a program that we call Mardi Gras, where we invite people to celebrate their faith through creative means. Annually, we host a Living Faith Awards, where we recognize people in the community who are living out their faith. We have a program called Women to Women that reaches out to marginalized women to create a safe space for them to just be heard. And we also have a program that we refer to as our JEDI program, which is Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion.
Oh, nice.
And
nice.
we do things that celebrate all different backgrounds. Just before the pandemic hit, when the 1619 Project came out, you might recall that, recognizing 400 years of slavery, we had a beautiful event that talked about the Black experience. We've done one on Muslim spirituality. So we're seeking to continue to do these. We've got one on Hindu spirituality coming up next month, which I'm really excited about.
That sounds
So
wonderful.
If you can't tell, I'm excited about.
I can tell. I did just see, I think the 1619 is going to be a movie. I think I just saw that. So I'm excited. I'm excited for that. You mentioned that you got your master's, but you felt like there was something else. So then it seemed to come as you discovered what the Spirituality Network, but also as you were transitioning from in your career. Well, if you don't mind my asking, what age is that bucket or that range in there? If you don't mind my asking, like when did all of that start? You start to become aware of this shift that wasn't going to be enough, just like in a professional setting. It sounded like something, what I call like that indwelling or oh my goodness, I'm forgetting their names right now. The creator of creation spirituality, Matthew Fox, talks about the indwelling presence.
Yeah.
And so is that something that you felt, and what age did that happen for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, it started in my corporate setting. Back around 2005, I was in our organizational design part of our HR organization, and our CEO charged us to develop a diversity and inclusion strategy. And the company had dabbled in diversity and inclusion in the past, probably with less than desirable impact. It didn't go real well the first time. So we really took the time to hear from a variety of people from all different diverse backgrounds. And that just caught my attention. So I'm an immigrant to the United States. I came to the US from Cuba, and I was 4 years old, so very young, but I've always felt a little bit as an outsider. I didn't speak any English when I started first grade, and so much of my life has been about being on the outside looking in. And it was interesting to hear stories of other people that were in a similar situation from different backgrounds. And I don't know how familiar you are with the Enneagram. I'm a type 3, which is an achiever, and the type 3 is notorious for being a chameleon. So I've spent so much of my life morphing to fit into one area or another. And as I've become more aware of that, and the work that we did on diversity and inclusion, I became aware of the importance of authenticity and transparency and vulnerability. So, I started dabbling in that in the corporate setting. And then when I went through our Well Streams program, so much of what you do in preparing to be a spiritual director is really looking at yourself really, really deeply and making sure you understand your gifts, your strengths, your shadow side, so that when you're sitting with someone, you are aware of who you are, so that doesn't impact the relationship that you're trying to establish with whoever you're sitting with. So it was just an immersive deep dive into exploring myself that was pretty phenomenal, and just great appreciation for who I was as an individual and the inherent value and worth that I had, rather than the worth and value that I perceived I needed to have through my accomplishments. So it's been a fun journey over these past 15 to 17 years.
Yeah. So I think it really talks to how you explored a different way to satiate what was happening inside you, and this unrest whether you call it this unrest or I was sitting with one of my friends who's helped editing a book I'm writing, and she said that I didn't describe that powerfully enough in some of the writings. This feeling of needing something that felt like I wasn't getting it in my traditional settings, and she gave me the word of seismic. And even though it didn't come like in a tidal wave, it came more like it just wasn't going to appease for me until I went there. So I'm in my 50s going to college. I'm in my 50s going to seminary. And there were times where I was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing? I should just be crocheting and taking my grandkids to the park. And but there was something else that said, no, this is what feels right. This is what's bringing me close to tears every day as I'm being seen and learning the things that are finally talking to whatever this is this indwelling that's inside me. So I just love to hear that for different people. So for you, you landed at Spirituality Network and became certified in this spiritual director, which I very much agree with. Especially anybody who's going to be offering any kind of spiritual care, companionship, guidance in any way needs some kind of accreditation that goes beyond biblical counseling or anything like that. Going to your Bible college isn't enough to be able to help somebody with any kind of life direction, because a lot of times there's an intersection, and I'm sure you can speak to this, with people come to you with a spiritual crisis that actually manifested from a life crisis, and they start to see how those two, and I didn't think about talking to you about this, so this isn't in the questions that we talked about, but if you're comfortable talking a little bit about why it's so important when people are looking for counselors or guidance. I always said I was in spiritual care with someone or spiritual companioning someone. That was language that I used. So what do you think about spiritual direction and why that is important for people?
Yeah. So I think there might be a tendency for people to want to bucket and organize their life in different ways. Like, here's my spiritual life, this is my physical life, and my social life. And so I believe in connectedness, that everything is connected in one way or another. So I can't look at my spiritual life separate from my family life and my social life and all of these things. It just as an aside, we're putting on a workshop on bravely exploring sexuality and spirituality coming up in the next few months, because these things are so integrated. We can't talk about anything that's happening in our lives within a vacuum or outside of the context of everything else that's going on. Mm-hmm. And spirituality is part of that. I think our challenge as spiritual directors or spiritual companions is to pay attention to what's going on in someone's life, and then noting what are the spiritual aspects or the sacred aspects of whatever they're dealing with, so that they could make those connections for themselves. As a spiritual director, I really don't direct or guide anything. I notice, I mirror back what I'm seeing and invite people to explore whatever they need to explore. My understanding of scripture and the Bible and my faith is totally irrelevant to what that person needs to do. So, it's just my job to find those things that I'm noticing. So by being very empathetic and in tune and without any judgment, so that they can explore and make those connections for themselves.
So good. So good. And I really encourage people. I always, when people are looking for that, because I gave up my private practice a while ago, even though I could have a full book with it. Now it's to find someone who is certified as either someone who's gone through a seminary program as I did, or someone who's gone through a spiritual direction program who understands that, or both, is really good too.
Yes. Oh yeah.
I do caution people, not that there aren't good biblical counselors out there, but it can also be in a place where the patriarchal structure is such that is what's being protected. So the whatever need you have, or whatever brokenness you're bringing to this person who you are trusting with your heart, mind, and soul, they're going to filter it through the language of this literal interpretation of the Bible. And that often leads to more harm than good. So that's why I think having more spiritual directors out there is so important.
Yeah, totally agree. I've been to counselors that had a biblical worldview, and my biblical view is far more progressive and open and inclusive than theirs was. So it wasn't terribly helpful for me, because it wasn't speaking to me where I was.
Well, I have a lot of people who follow me who are deconstructing. And if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit, because you mentioned that you came from the more maybe a fundamentalist conservative Christianity into a progressive. So what led to that change to move towards a more progressive Christian belief for you?
Yeah. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Walk to Emmaus.
Yes. Yes.
There are several retreat-like weekends like that.
I still have my crocheted cross hanging in my closet that you get at the end of that. Oops, that's a spoiler. You're not supposed to tell those things out loud. Anyway, if you make the 4 days, you're going to get a cross at the end of it.
I have mine as well. It was a really eye-opening experience for me, and it made a connection from my head to my heart that I hadn't ever been able to make. So I was like super invested in all of that, and very active in our evangelical church. At the same time, I'm a gay man in a mixed orientation marriage. And when that came out, I was asked to step out of a leadership role, which was just heartbreaking for me. It was really wrenching. And so I felt really devastated by my community, but I never felt separated from God. And even the following weekend, I found myself in a new church that was more open and progressive. I knew that that still needed to be a very important part of my life. I just knew that the home that I had in my prior church was not going to be the right place for me. But I knew I needed to find someplace. And so I found this church, and I'm still a member of that church. But through my uh, experience, our Well Streams program is 3 years to be trained to be a spiritual director. And that was when I first got introduced to the notion that there are stages or phases that our faith can go through over a lifetime. Many people, will come from no faith to a deep faith and get entrenched in their church, and they stay there for the rest of their lives. And they're perfectly content with that. I didn't know that I had permission to ask questions that I had in the back of my mind. I thought, oh, that's not safe. That's not right. That's not appropriate for me to ask those questions. And then when I realized that I could, that led to a deconstruction of my faith that opened my views of who God was and my relationship with God and with the entire universe in ways that I didn't know were possible. So, it caused me to say, well, I don't believe this anymore, or that might have served me at one time, but it doesn't serve me anymore. So I think I went through a deconstruction and into a reconstruction relatively quickly because I had permission to do it. And I had permission to do it in an environment that was super safe and loving and non-judgmental. It's often said that you don't experience change unless you experience some kind of discomfort. And I think that's true to some extent. But when you're held in a super loving embrace without judgment, you're safe to be able to explore things that are different and not feel the implications of the trauma that usually comes from change. So I think it's a both and, where, yeah, discomfort often leads to change, but that doesn't always have to be the case.
That's true. And well, you brought up a good point in that I too felt the same about the Emmaus walk. I had a life-changing experience there, but then I knew my road back to that. I knew I was, as I was started to deconstruct and going on to seminary, I was stayed in touch with them, but it became very clear that they were closing off the avenue. At first, they were very interested in my ordination until they realized that I was not being ordained in a seminary, Christian seminary experience. And so this is a really good example of how there is good in that there is a spiritual movement that can help get you to where you're going. It might not be where you end up.
Exactly.
And so that there was a goodness there that I am grateful that I had that experience. But then both of us have had the experience of where that acceptance of us was conditional for different reasons, but very much was conditional. And people at that point have a choice. You can say, all right, I'm going to bring myself into compliance because this is the community where I feel I most belong, or I can't ignore what else is happening. And for you to say, as you did that, within a week, you were going, something inside you was so courageous and strong and balanced and just grounded in who your authenticity, that you were able to do that. And that's not to say for whoever's listening that's your story, Alejandro. It's not someone else's. So it's not that someone else who's dealing with other layers of trauma cannot take that kind of rejection and then immediately be able to respond to say, I'm going to go find my truth. I'm going to go find people who support that truth. Sometimes they languish in that for years, and you see that. So, but I think it's also hope for people to say, you can, people who are trying to find are pushing up against the spiritual boundaries of their community, that it's okay to go out beyond those, because if they are your people, they will accept you back as you are. And when that's okay too, then it's time to move on to find your next experience or your next journey. So I love how you describe that.
I think that, well, the social media algorithms totally have me pegged, because, it seems like every other thing that I get put in front of me has something to do with deconstruction. And I am sad in some ways, because I understand the deconstruction that people are going through. I totally get it. And I also feel that as human beings, we have this innate need to connect to something bigger than ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I fear that some people go through the deconstruction and stay there without understanding that there is life beyond whatever they've experienced that could be so rewarding and energizing and affirming. And, I think you used the word being seen. You can be seen and you can be heard exactly as you are. And that's just a beautiful place to be.
Well, that's interesting. When you hear my closing, you'll know that you and I are almost, you are no doubt, you and I are kindred spirits in that way. And there are people also, I love that you're saying that, and why it's so important that we have these communities that we're finding each other. Like, I didn't even know you existed, and now here we are. Because for me, I always knew, I didn't know what it looked like, but I knew that as I was going through seminary, I wanted to help people who I felt were standing in the gap. And if they didn't find whatever this was going on inside them, if they didn't find hope, if they didn't find that there was a way out, that they would languish. And that means either it can be just as dangerous to give up and fake it in the pew as it is that you give up, but you stay in these indoctrinated beliefs and you live with this belief that you are a sinful, disdainful person that God has rejected, but you'd rather live away from this because you can no longer stand what you found in church, and you have no hope, you have no options.
Yeah.
So there's and then building that community of people around that. The other part that I often see, and we don't often address, but I come across it every once in a while, is the person who jumps from leaving church to just bitter and doesn't do the deconstructing. So anything that looks back this way as someone who's healing from religious trauma, trying to reconcile their faith and their humanity, trying to figure out who or what God is, not based on the definition of their religious experience, but where is this spiritual journey taking them? All of that is mocked.
Yes,
right. But they consider themselves deconstructed. And, I get that quite a bit. So I'm very careful about how I don't want to be seen as mocking someone's belief as much as I do as pushing back on those who believe their beliefs give them the right to oppress another.
Yeah.
That's the only, so I try to stay in that, but sometimes it's very easy. I get a lot, I'm sure you do too, on your FYP, where you'll see some pretty outrageous religious experiences where people are, I try not to get into that bucket because I don't want to get into mocking the avenue that gets you where you're going.
That's exactly right. And that may be perfect for them for their entire life. And if that's the path that they're called to take, beautiful for them.
Yeah.
But I'm with you.
There you go.
As soon as you cross the line into oppressing or marginalizing or limiting someone else, I can't abide.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that those like you in your position as someone who is a director of a spiritual community, and also someone who's overseeing this spiritual director, I as a minister, we're held to a higher code. And so we have to watch those. But anyway, that kind of took a left turn with that conversation. But I think it is important for people. They'll send me videos and say, "Can you believe this?" And we want to. I think that somebody out there needs to hear that. Someone else. I don't want to limit your belief in miracles or faith healing. If you need to get up and dance around and get immersed in the Holy Spirit, whatever those beliefs can be sacred and good. And I think maybe this is coming up for me because of you bringing up the Emmaus walk. And 4 days of pretty intense, I mean, soul work.
Good work.
Look in the mirror and find you. And that was good. That was a good experience. I don't regret it for a second. I'm sure you don't either.
Me either. No, it was so foundational for understanding my faith, and it was a beautiful part of the journey. It was just, that was a season for it.
There you go.
And I think one of the beauties of moving beyond that is getting to the place where I don't have to be right. I think my path is the right path for me, but I'm not positive. I'm doing what I think is right for me, and I'm trusting that you're going to do what's right for you.
I love that. And I've often, and honestly, when I first got on TikTok, I have to be honest, because when I first came onto social media, I got so much pushback from the very people that rejected me, that really did not want me to be a part of their community, but they really didn't want me talking about it either.
Yes.
That I think I made an assumption. And then all of a sudden I'm making friends with a lot of progressive pastors, a lot of following me. I'm like, well, what are they doing? I bring this suspiciousness. Like, what is this? To find like, no, they get me. They get me, that they understand that I'm not proselytizing for people to leave church.
Right.
I want you to deconstruct and look back and see where things were wrong, where things were good, and now what serves your highest good. What will help you stand in your authenticity. And if that means returning to a church that can serve you, and you can be aligned in that, like you said, finding that place where you can be seen and held and loved for who you are, then what is that for you? And for some of us, we just deconstructed and stayed here. Mm-hmm. And here feels like it feels like an experience that's never ending, but I also think that can be true inside religion as well, for those who are doing the work. I want to make sure we have time. We could go on like this for forever, but I don't want, one of the things that I'm really impressed with, because I took a deep dive into your calendar of events, and I have the honor of speaking next month at one of your queer spirituality events. And I so love that you are making this not only an event that's going to happen regularly, that you have brought it up as its own unique portal, inviting this, understanding that so many people are looking for that connection, and also that healing that's happened to them outside and just in the secular world, but also in organized religion. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about the concept behind that, and the discussion that you and I are going to have, which is the importance of allies in this whole realm, this whole energy. So could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to. So, I know the trauma that I experienced from church because of my orientation. And I know that many, many other in the LGBTQ plus community have experienced their own trauma. And as I mentioned before, even so, I believe that there is still a desire to connect to something bigger, and to move past the the trauma into something that brings wholeness and freedom. And so we've been doing these events on a quarterly basis. The first one that we did was just kind of an orientation into the topic, and to have a couple of people share their stories of how they migrated through their coming out stories, and where they are on their path. The second one we did focused on the transgender community, and I had two beautiful conversations with two transgender women. One who was just a fascinating individual, that grew up in a very racist and misogynistic culture, and transitioned into the most loving person I think I have ever met.
Mm.
And she's, I think, in her 80s or 70s, so well advanced, in the most beautiful spirit, and active in her church, and just a great story. The other person recently transitioning, and still searching for her faith connection, so which is perfectly okay. That's where she is. I thought that was such an important conversation to have, because of the particular trauma and abuse and violence against the transgender community.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're going to be focusing on allies. Allies are so important to any marginalized community, and there are ways that you can be an ally in a positive way, and there are ways that you can really mess it up with very good intentions.
Do you want to speak on that for just like briefly? What would be a way? I think that's important for,
yeah,
especially for the cisgender community who's trying to be helpful. I mean, the first thing I can think of is, we all have been trained to be white saviors.
yes.
I mean, that's always sitting back there, and that I want to remind myself, am I moving into this situation where I think I'm the white savior? Pull yourself back, because it's part of our indoctrination. But please, if you can speak on that. I'm looking for something while you're speaking as well.
Well, I think probably the most foundational thing, one of the things that we in the Spirituality Network do, is we minister with people. We don't minister to people. And so I think it's really important that when you're an ally, that you don't speak for somebody else. That's their story to tell. We have to honor that people should tell their own stories.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be careful that you move too far into it. And, the white savior complex is a perfect way to frame that up. You don't want to be codependent. You don't want to be a savior. You want to let people have their dignity and stand on their own merits, and be beside them or supporting them from behind, not necessarily cutting the path for them in front.
Exactly. That's wonderful. When you were speaking about the people you've had so far in the queer spirituality, it reminded me of a movie on Netflix called Secret Love. Have you heard of it? Okay. I don't remember the names of the women, but they were in their 40s. Of course, they had to keep it secret, and it was heartbreaking. I cried during the entire movie to understand how much of their own lives they had to deny themselves. So just so they would be accepted by their family and basically the population at large. Mm-hmm. So that might be something that you would enjoy to
I'll
hear that story.
Thank you.
Another person that I thought of as you were talking as well is Tim from the New Evangelicals, who has a presence on TikTok and is very big on Instagram. He also has a very good podcast. And what I like, not only is Tim doing the work of advocacy, he is still holding on to his faith as an evangelical. So he's really disrupting the norm. And that might be somebody who might be an opportunity for you to expand in that conversation as well. He's very energetic.
I will look him up. Thank you.
We do lives together every once in a while, so that might be someone that you want to. I wanted to revisit something that you said about the Spirituality Network before we start to wrap this up. You said something about people existing in wholeness and freedom, and I could tell that those were very intentional words.
Yeah.
I talk about, showing up as your authentic self, showing up with authenticity, if you can do so safely. But these were very intentional, and I respect those. And I wanted to hear a little bit about what those words mean for you and the work that the Spirituality Network does.
Yeah. So maybe I'll start this by saying I have really shifted from embracing the idea of original sin to original blessing.
Okay.
I'm completely dismissing the idea of original sin as something that guides us. I believe that we are created whole and perfect and beautiful. And over the course of our lives, we experience all kinds of things that separate us from the divine. And I think our lives are really, hopefully, about the journey of getting back to who we were originally, to be whole and to be free. And so I think it's a matter of finding what is preventing us from being whole or free, calling attention to that, exploring it, wrestling with it so that we can uncover whatever it is, that barrier that's keeping us from the divine. So it's really just a matter of getting back to where we started.
That's beautiful. And the freedom, especially because for so many people, that word is triggering. That is when it can be used often as a means of control. In that, again, speaking to the people who follow me and looking at the traditional patriarchal language, freedom comes from a place of your God-given right to be free according to these patriarchal conditions. As long as you follow them, then you're free through the construct through which you're free. So using that word outside of that language is also freeing, giving new definition. And just, you started this by saying, well, I'm going to give you a new definition of what I think sin is. And I just did a video yesterday, and I do this on purpose, where I said, oh, by the way, I don't believe in sin. I just throw that in there. And sure enough, people will start like, wait, what? I don't believe this either, but what? Let's disrupt this conversation a little bit and talk about this whole concept of original sin and the brokenness through these flawed bodies, that we then can never be good enough. We can never be righteous enough. It's only through the blood of Christ that we can be. And again, if that's your belief system, that's fine. But when it becomes oppressive to those of us that somehow you are flawed, unless you contort yourself to fit that, which often means denying yourself, denying parts of yourself, or denying your value system, or denying that you don't believe that my religious beliefs gives me the right to oppress another.
Yeah.
So I think that's so important to take that language and say, no, we're going to give it to you and offer it to you as something that is liberating.
Yes. Yeah.
So it felt very intentional. I have a dog waking up, so that's my signal that it's time. Alejandro, I'll start to close this, but I just wanted to give you one last chance to say anything that you want, and also give your website so people can find you. And then I'll look forward to our conversation in a couple of weeks to talk about what it means to be an ally.
Awesome. Well, our website is spiritualitynetwork.org. Please come and visit. If you want to connect with me, you can link to me from that website. Let me just say this about the Spirituality Network. I believe that we are very much in an interesting time in society, and many of the institutions that have been so foundational for so long are coming under a lot of scrutiny and criticism, and often for good reasons. The church being one of those, and the 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 things that are drawing us away from those institutions should not get in the way of helping us to achieve the best that we can be. I believe the Spirituality Network has something that the world desperately needs. And it's just an honor and a thrill for me to be able to leverage my talents and gifts for that organization. And I invite people to come check us out and see what you might find. The pandemic has been helpful in moving us beyond the central Ohio area to be able to offer a lot more virtually. And we invite all to come and join us.
Absolutely. Thank you again. And I'm sure that we'll continue this conversation in the future. Alejandro Rodriguez of the Spirituality Network. Thank you again.
Thank you.
You can find show notes wherever you are listening to this podcast, and I will include the website and some other things that we mentioned during this podcast. If you'd like to watch the uncut version of today's episode on my YouTube channel, you can go there, where we're always uploading new content. Check out this Patreon community to join the Numa Soul membership and access unique opportunities, including bonus content and my live weekly gatherings there. And of course, you can see me on all the social media platforms, including TikTok, or you can find us at our website at revkarla.com, or Numa Soul Center for Spiritual Transformation at numasoul.com. Okay, beloveds, I'm honored to be in this space with you, and I pray you receive something. I know I did, because the teacher teaches what she needs to hear. And now, beloveds, go in peace and be at peace. Go in love and may you be loved. Go and know that others are on this journey with you, and you are not alone. You are seen and deeply and unconditionally loved, just the way you are. Blessings on your week, and I'll see you soon.